hyacinths came up. Yeah.
Would you say
The hyacinths.
Oh, yeah.
Say that 3 times fast.
Okay, we will get started. I apologize. So Betsy, you've been getting the weekly experiment of mine. Every week I've done the setup a little bit differently in terms of the sound system in the back and what's working and what's not working. So if you need more volume or if you can't hear something or can't see something, just let me know. Right now you should see the screen, the When Helping Hurts screen, and maybe a little picture of us. Mm-hmm. Lovely. Excellent. Okay. So we are now on week 4 of our 6-week plan for this book. Today we are looking at joining in God's work. So as a review, actually, I'm going to review this in the next slide as well. Is this slide? It's this slide. Okay, we'll start here. So imagine that your church wants to help an individual, specific individual, or a specific community. We're talking about helping people, right? Notably those who are materially poor, right? Who would you go to for advice first? And so as a group, I'll let you brainstorm the line. There are oranges back there that we have to eat. So from last night's session, from last night's meeting. So I'm going to grab those. But as a group, brainstorm together. You want to look for people who could give you good ideas, good resources, good thoughts, good direction on how to help a specific person or a specific community in another part of the world. Who might you consult? Yeah, right. Serious answers only.
But ignoring that is, yeah.
What would they ask you?
What would they say very brightly, well, we don't do that directly to this church, but we do have a variety of organizations. We donate to the crime. Would you like us from workers? They're going to be 573 area. I mean, I didn't do it, but what I don't ever really have to do is to that a person trying to figure out what they do. I mean,
to your point, usually the people with the craziest stories are actually the most real situations. And the people with the most mundane situations, the most mundane stories are usually lying. It's if there's going to be a liar, that's what they're going to be. It's very strange.
Well, it's interesting that sometimes when they start telling you their story, but they haven't told you what they need, what they want, what they're looking for. But it's like, listen to this. What kind of assistance are you looking for? Well, I got this in Missouri. But again, I don't.
That's a very good point. What else, sorry, while I was mentioned, well, back there, was there anything else that was mentioned? Any other professionals you might, professionals or otherwise, with whom you might confer? Resources we have available, good. Yeah.
Well, to see if there is someone in the church that might know of this person and say, yes, this is good.
Relationship, so vetting, it comes back to that. You're right. Yeah. Mhm.
Didn't get a question that you now, if you're a small town, you talk to the police.
Oh, they know.
Because the small town will know.
Absolutely.
They'll know, you know, what sort of needs the person maybe they have.
Right, right. The police will know. In small towns, police often act as social worker too, to a certain degree, right? So they'll know the families that have, well, they'll know family histories and they'll know situations, and well, that person's asking for help, make sure it's not for this reason or that reason. That makes sense because of
Help them by getting help.
Right.
And our men and police officers, they know the whole time.
They do.
They will.
Yeah, and it's in moments like that, I'm like, okay, small town, thank goodness. This is a small city. There are moments when that shines through.
Yeah, it does. I've been small now.
If there's no relationship, that's not very helpful.
Right, yeah.
Was there ever a time, and this is kind of a separate question, but it will relate, I promise, at one point. Has there ever been a time when someone recognized in you a gift or an ability that you might not have realized you possess? For example, for me, when I was 14 or so, I did my annual swimming lesson, which I despised. I failed the first 3 levels 3 times each. But my swim class instructor, I don't know, she and I hit it off. I was 14 and doing my, mid-grade swim level. She's like, you could be a lifeguard someday if you really wanted to. I was a lifeguard within 12 months.
Really?
Not because I could swim very well. I'm what you call a short distance power force swimmer. I can carry anything from one end of the pool to the other. That's it. Don't put me on a beach. It's not a distance swimmer, but I had what she liked in my leadership skills, or my leadership skills, and my ability to shout at children who were smaller than me and to obey me. So as a lifeguard, that was really good. But she noticed these general leadership skills, and that led me to be a lifeguard, which led me to be a swim instructor, which led me to teaching, which led me to ministry. So I blame her. But that's a really drastic example. But an example where I did swimming. Good grief, I wasn't going to be a swimmer, and it worked out.
Or contacting someone about something that we did in class or something that this middle school was also. And how it made it how as an adult.
So former students, 10, 15, 20 years later, reminding you of the little activity that did.
In some cases.
Sometimes they can change our direction of life. Sometimes those kinds of comments will inspire new hobbies. If someone recognizes a gift or an ability that you know of or not, generally feels good, right? Excellent. So before we jump into this week's video, I'm going to do a really quick review of the last couple of weeks. So the first part of this book was talking about this diagram and we define poverty, or rather the authors define poverty as the manifestation of broken relationships with ourselves, with creation, with others, and with God. And how, when we break those relationships, or when there is tension or brokenness in one of those relationships, it throws off the balance of any other of those relationships. So if there's a broken relationship with self, a person can then not understand who they are in the world, or in relation to others, or in relation to God. And so someone would walk out with low self-esteem, which is very often the case. And occasionally people come out with a God complex, thinking that they're in charge, because there is no God. That can really throw a wrench in things. If you have broken relationships with others, that will manifest itself in self-centeredness, which, you are the only person, others don't matter, or you will exploit others, abuse others, and what they can provide. And, if you have a tense or broken relationship with creation, that leads to a imbalance or a struggle with stewardship, a loss of sense of purpose. It could be a focus on materialism. It could be manifest in overworking or underworking, and understanding how one uses or interacts with creation. And then brokenness with food, that relationship with God manifests itself in denying God's existence and authority. It can also default to, if there is no God, then we default to lifting up false gods, materialism, things in creation or ourselves. So, poverty alleviation. Poverty is the brokenness of relationships. This is the important part. Poverty alleviation, then, is the rebuilding of those relationships. Last week, we talked about 3 phases of that work, of supporting others and rebuilding relationships. People who are in a position of need, they are in poverty, they will have had a crisis generally. They'll have been at a certain level, they're at that blue level, they have a crisis, and when they hit that crisis, they are on the downward spiral. The relief work that we provide often, that we get through Presbyterian Disaster Assistance was the example we used last week. The relief work basically stops the crisis from continuing, from spiraling out. It's when we come in and we provide to meet the immediate needs of someone that's in need. Rehabilitation is that process by which we are helping, that's the key word I'm using, but we are working with someone generally to help them get to the point of where they were before the crisis. So Haiti, for example, when they had their big earthquake in 2014, 13, about a decade ago. The crisis happened. There was a ton of influx of money and resources to help with relief work. Then they were working on rehabilitation because there was so much money. Almost every organization that does work or receives money to do that work in Haiti also has to have a plan for what to do beyond that rehabilitation, getting the country back to where it was. And that is what most of our mission work ends up being in reality, is development work. There's a lot of relief work that is done, but when we go somewhere to do a mission trip, or when we support missionaries or overseas mission coworkers overseas, often it is doing that work of development, helping people get beyond where they were. So you'll likely, this is from the authors, you'll likely realize now that responding to a natural disaster across the world will involve relief work, which is very different from development work. That's the real point here, is that these are different kinds of ministry, different kinds of times. Either way, the desire to progress to the next stage often includes a survey That's where we're going to focus this week. What is needed? What are the needs of that community in which we are serving? This approach is fundamentally flawed, unfortunately, because we come into the place saying, well, you don't have this, you don't have this. It's a needs-based approach to doing that work. And so what it does is it approaches that work, that ministry, already recognizing that they don't have something. It ignores many factors that remain, including the skills and resources that are often already there. Thereby leaving, when and if those people that come in to support the community leave, they may be taking the skills that are needed to continue that work with them. So we need to recognize the skills and resources that are already there to help them move into recovery and into development after that relief phase of work. So this week's focus is joining God's work, acknowledging that God is already at work wherever we may go, or may be, or may serve. God's already working, so why work against it? Let's work with it.
One of the things that we have to come to believe is that everyone has something to contribute in the life of the community. That no one is so poor that they have nothing to bring to the exchange. We've been created in the image of God. We've been created with potential, with capacities, with talents, and a design to maximize those, to use every bit of our God-given ability to accomplish useful and productive things in this world. Whatever erodes that, whatever diminishes that, whatever takes away from that sense of dignity and purpose is against the will of God.
Innovation is not the problem. People assuming that they're innovators is the problem. It's our attitude, it's our approach, it's our mindset. Rather than coming in and trying to establish ourselves as innovators in a situation, we go in and we seek, who are the innovators in this situation? Asking people to be the solution to their own problem, allowing them to innovate, that's what empowerment really is. That's real change. So that when we leave, we drive out of the dangerous neighborhood, we go to our homes elsewhere. Guess who stays? Guess who becomes a part of their own solution?
There was real truth in the fact that God has given everybody inherent dignity and worth and value. And when you set up a situation where you forget that, where you feel like you're just a little bit better than them, or you're more knowledgeable than them, or because you're more educated than them, you have more answers than they have, then you are set up to failure. You get the nice, polite nods, but you don't get transformation.
You've heard people come back from trips and say, oh, those people, they have nothing. It's this assumption there's just a deficit of human resources, economic resources, knowledge resources in a person's life, in a family's life, in a community's life. And when you have that perspective, of this needs-based perspective, what tends to happen is you quickly assume, oh, the solutions are going to have to come from the outside. The knowledge has got to come from the outside. The economic resources need to come from the outside. All solutions are not based in the community, but from outside the community, and in you come. And that approach is going to intensify people's poverty of being and poverty of purpose, even as you're trying to overcome their poverty of condition, their physical realities.
Needs-based development focuses on the deficits and shortcomings in the life of a person or a community. Folks, let's remember what's going on here. We've got folks who are struggling with a sense of superiority and God complexes. That's us in the room today. And we're trying to engage with materially poor people who typically are suffering from a marred self-image. Does it seem to you like a good starting point in that dynamic that we're trying to overcome, a good starting point to walk up to a materially poor person and say, what's wrong with you? How can I fix you? How are you broken? What do you need from me? Guys, it's not a good starting point to overcoming this dynamic. It starts off at exactly the foot that we want to avoid. What needs-based development does is it assumes that solutions and resources will come from outside of the individual or community. It says, you're poor, you can't do it. The solution is going to come from outside of you. And it sets them up for expecting something to be brought in to save them, which is exactly what we want to get away from. What needs-based development fails to do is to identify and to mobilize the assets of a person or a community. What's the goal? The goal is restoration. The goal is for people to have a sense that they're made in the image of God. He has blessed them with gifts, all kinds of gifts. Physical resources, social resources, spiritual resources. And to get them to start to steward those resources and develop those resources more effectively. That's the goal. So by starting off by saying, I don't know what you got, but I know what I've got over here that I can use to fix you. What do you need? Doesn't start off with where you want to go. It starts off on the wrong foot. And so in needs-based development, we're ignoring the assets that are already there. Asset-based development starts off with what's right. It focuses on the capabilities, skills, and resources of the individual or community. Oh, I think it was about 12 years ago, I was in a Sunday school class at my church, and it was a Sunday school class on working with the poor in our community and how to do it. And I was told to go out and engage in an activity called asset mapping. It's a fancy word for basically asking people to list their gifts and abilities. And I thought it was the stupidest thing I ever heard of. And I was supposed to go door to door in a ghetto in the city in which I live. In the city in which I live, there are significant racial tensions. I was supposed to go into a ghetto full of African-American households. I was supposed to go in as a 6'10" white guy on a Sunday morning, knock on doors, and say, hello, I'm from this church called New City Fellowship. I'm from New City Fellowship, and I'm here today to love my community. What gifts and resources and abilities do you have? Now, it turns out this isn't the best way to do this, but off we went. I pretty much wanted to die. There was a class down the hall on the fine points of theology, and I'm thinking to myself, why didn't I go to that class? So off we go, 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Now, anybody who answers the door is not in church, so it's kind of a selected sample. So, knock on the door, a lady comes to the door, she's about 5 foot tall, an African-American lady at my navel. And I'm looking down at her as non-paternalistically as I possibly can. And she's looking up at me. Now, the scene itself was just bizarre. So African-American lady at my navel looking up at me, I'm this giant, I'm going, oh, dear Jesus, just beam me up right now. I said, ma'am, I'm from New City Fellowship. I'm here today to love my community. What gifts and abilities has God given you? And she looks up at me and she goes, what? And I said, what gifts and abilities has God given you? And she said, what? And then from behind her, in her apartment, in a housing project in a ghetto, from behind her comes a voice. She can cook chitlins like there's no tomorrow. I looked at the lady and I said, ma'am, is that true? And she's kind of got a little smile on her face. And she said, I'm a pretty good cook. She said, why don't you come on inside? I want to talk to you some more. Right. So we went inside. She called all the people in the house together. We're all sitting around on couches. I didn't know what to do next. So I just reverted to my script. I'm here from New City Fellowship today. I'm here to love my community. What gifts and abilities has God given all of you? I wasn't sure what's going to happen next. One guy says, well, that guy over there, his name is Jake. He can fix bikes like nothing you've ever seen before. I've never seen anybody like this guy. He can fix bikes. And Jake goes, I am pretty good at bikes, but Hal over there, he's an auto mechanic. If your car is ever having trouble, Hal is your guy. He can fix your car. They spent 20 minutes bragging about each other. And I started to notice something. They started to sit a little straighter in their seats. They started to kind of have a little sense of that they were somebody. I looked back at the first lady. I said to her, I said, ma'am, what are your dreams? What are your gifts? I've asked her. Now I'm asking her, what are your dreams? She said, dreams? I said, yeah. And she said, well, I've never really told anybody this before. I said, okay, but we're connecting. She said, my dream has always been to have my own cooking business, my own catering business. I said, what prevents you from achieving those dreams? She said, I don't really know. She said, I guess what it comes down to, she said, I know how to cook, but there's kind of the business part of it I don't know how to do. She said, I think they call it a business plan. She said, I don't know how to write a business plan. I think I need somebody to help me write a business plan. I said, what if I had some folks from my church come who know business and kind of help you develop your business ideas? You can use your gifts to fulfill your dreams. She goes, I love that. Asking the question is poverty alleviation. Now, folks, I'm not saying this is the end of the story. I'm not saying you never bring in outside resources. I'm simply saying the starting point is to focus on gifts and abilities that they already have.
Okay, so we're going to pick up where we left off last time. Got a few different odds and ends of things to do. Okay, this is what section are we in now? The role of participation in community development, right? It's the process you want to focus on, not the product. Now, we might create what's successful from our perspective sent to our donors, but way more important is for the community members or the households involved that they can say, yes, this worked for us. This savings group thing we did, it was worth it. That was a good thing for us. Or they come back and say that savings group was okay, but, and you got to listen to that but. So they've got to be part of the funding success, and then you have to be able to respond to that. Does it make sense? So it's a step further where they're really at the table all the way through. And at the end of the day, they're speaking into, was this successful or not? If you're working in a community where there's poverty, then you need to be looking at who else is addressing this in our community. What are those different groups and peoples, and how can we work with them in what they're already trying to do? What might we add to the mix? And if you're outside that community, even more so, you need to ask who's working there, who's doing good work, and what does it mean to come alongside them to help them succeed? It's not about us running in and doing something new necessarily. It's saying what's already there, what's God's already doing, and how do we kind of jump on board and saying, I'm going to be faithful to stand with you as you do God's work in that community.
An asset-based approach is one where you really approach a community or approach your target group with the sense that they have things to offer. They have inherent dignity and worth that God has given them. They have experiences that you don't have. And so while you may be bringing some new technical knowledge to them, you are going to sit in the space with them and be a learner alongside of them.
When you come with relief in a place where people's lives are static and stable, with just limited issues, then oftentimes you're actually creating harm. You're harming the development process, or you're harming the people within there. Oftentimes that outside resource never help people to see their own assets. It blinds them to see the assets that they have, so that they can be able to use those assets to emerge. And remember that the use of local resources is what brings in sustainability. Let outside resource, outside ideas, outside help only come to supplement what that already exists, but not to replace it.
Peoples who are poor themselves as households and communities, their voice and their involvement is the essence of what development is. So participation is core. It's often been said it's the engine of development. It's what creates ownership of what's being done, and out of that ownership that creates enthusiasm. Let's get this done because it's ours, it's our idea.
If you want to make sure that the well is used, if you want to make sure the tractor is used, if you want to make sure the malaria nets are used, you have to use a participatory approach. You've got to get people to engage in the process, because if people own the thing, it'll work better. And that is true. But our message to you today is that participation isn't just a means to getting the tractor used. Participation isn't just a means to making sure the well is taken care of, but rather that having people participate in stewarding their gifts and resources, having people participate in the planning of how to use those resources, having people execute is a valid end in its own right. And so participation is not just a means to an end, but a valid end in its own right.
Did anything catch your attention in that? Was there, what did you notice? What did you hear? No.
I don't know if you can hear me, but the participation piece right there at the end,
Yeah.
that's really huge.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that, for noticing that. The participation is everything, ultimately, right? What else did you hear? Or any other stories or one-liners catch your attention? Not to replace, but to supplement. So that illustration that he used of going out and asking her to name her skills and then connecting it to the dream and being able to be that bridge. That's really obviously a perfect example for good reason of someone coming in and saying, what do you got? Let me help you get it so that you can do it. Yeah, it's a fun story. So at the beginning of the class, I asked, what if we were going to go and help someone or a community, a village somewhere, who would you look to for advice? Did you miss anybody in your list? Who did you miss? The people themselves, right? Yeah, it's set up to fail on that question, but the point being, it's something that we reactively do. It's our point of view, isn't it? We've got stuff, we've got it figured out, kind of most of the time. So we've got something to offer. We can bring you something. But yeah, starting it takes training, it takes practice to start with asking someone, who are you and what can you do? What are your gifts?
I don't know, you're better than that didn't reevaluate over half a century. I'm not sure I like it yet.
Hundreds of years, things have worked very well. And it's gotten us to where we are.
We've always done that.
Well, we've always done. Change is good. This is a quote from one of the book's authors. I can't remember if he's the tall, the 6'10" one, or the other guy, the classroom teacher. But one of them said, one of the things that we have to come to believe is that everyone has something to contribute in the life of the community. That no one is so poor that they have nothing to bring to the exchange. And ultimately, I love that quote because it really is the driving center of this chapter. So if you were to think for a moment of some of the people that you've met, places you've been where people are materially poor, have you noticed God-given skills, gifts in them, or gifts to their community?
I think that's the key, is to ask what those are, or be around them and have them you so that comes out.
So last week, Richard, I don't think you were here last week, but last week we had a guest hanging out, and he came and visited a few times. One of our homeless neighbors, Charlie, he's been on the chancel in worship, so he's been around. But Charlie has been around. Some of our homeless neighbors are familiar to us. Are there gifts that we could notice? What gifts could those be in them? That takes relationships, it takes time, but Right. I mean, if you spend time with them, with someone, eventually you'll be able to see if they've got, if they're analytical mind. Hopefully then you can say, oh, you probably know things about systems, or if they're very good with relationships, they may know how to negotiate things with people, or show up at the right time, at the right place, and get the right thing out of any exchange.
Oh, this guy really knows how to work on problems. So like it's bad. People are sure.
Right. Yeah, you're right. It was highlighted in our video. So those connections are helpful. And they're also helpful in that if we were going to use that as an example, that kind of relationship building in that community where there's a mechanic and there's a bike repair, and maybe they're not formally those things, but those people have those skills. Those are gifts to the community. The community can then come, the church members could come, and that puts money into the community again. Using the resources that they have, they can pay into that community's life and give dignity to the people that are serving, but also saying that, these relationships are things that we need to build so that we can recognize the gifts you have, so that we can all build one another up nonetheless. Do you think that people are always aware of their gifts? Or maybe that's a phrased word. Do you think that these people that are materially poor, know that they have gifts? Sometimes I feel like they probably don't recognize them as gifts or see them as valuable in that sense.
If they don't value themselves, they don't see what they can do with it.
Right, that low self-esteem thing comes back to low self-esteem, that relationship with self being broken or being stressed. It turns out things low self-esteem.
We had an organization decades ago.
I'm going to use my, otherwise I have to repeat.
Yes. Oh, well. If you can think of that, that's it, yes. We had an
Talk loud.
We had an organization years ago in New Jersey that provided emergency needs to people in the county.
It should work now.
And so, among other things, we found a guy who was a mechanic. And we had people funding our organization so we could pay him to fix cars for people who were indigent and needed transportation. We found somebody else with an empty barn who donated the barn for his use as a place to work on cars, to fix them for people who were indigent. And then we had some people donate some money so we could pay him as a mechanic to do this. After I know about that, that was 40 years ago or more. I had somebody else that would fix appliances and in the county. So it was a rural county, so we had 250, 300 families that were in poverty in the county.
It's another example that smaller towns, you have to work together too in a lot of those situations too. How are those gifts recognized in your community, or was that something that seemed to have been there when you got there, or?
Word of mouth.
Word of mouth.
Word of mouth. Somebody came along and said, well, so-and-so is a good shape you can. And
and then it went.
And it went. And mostly the word of mouth was out in the community. It wasn't among us church folks. Like the guy from bicycle and car.
Right.
And they would tell us about somebody else that they would barter.
It sounds like they were bragging on each other.
Yeah. But it took a couple of years to develop.
I like that idea too. And it sounds like that was already there. The church kind of tagged along onto what was already running.
Yeah, and we can take it out of like one small village and help out further out in the town.
Right, because of the connections you had. Yes. Okay, so they talked about needs-based approaches when it comes to development. A development approach that is needs-based focuses on the deficits and the shortcomings of a community or of an individual. So that's coming up to someone and saying, you need X in order to live well or to live better. An assets-based approach is one that focuses on identifying, mobilizing, and connecting the God-given capabilities, skills, and resources of a person or community. So there are two different ways of approaching someone who's in need or some community that's in need. The first one is saying, you need X, I've got X, or I can help you get X. The second one is saying, what have you got? Let's go from there. What have you got? How can we make that better? Or how can we help you find X or find whatever you see to be your X by using the Y and Z that you already have. So it really is a different angle to start from. So thinking about your interactions with material in the world, which actions, words, or attitudes communicate inherent value to each? So this is a really absurd question, but effectively, as we're thinking about how we interact with people that are in need, when we go and support someone, or when we help someone that's in need, what is the first thing that we're saying or doing? And what does that say about what we think of that?
We're saying we're example.
Yeah. I mean, even at our best point, I'd say you are exactly right. Even when we're trying to be sensitive, in reality, we're saying, we know you need some help. Is that okay? Deep sigh. It depends on where they are in that 3-step process. You're right, absolutely right. We're not asking them to help us. Right? And is there a way that we can do that without looking like we're crazy? It really calls attention to everything that we do, doesn't it? even the simple things like, and we keep bringing back those events that we do often here, Saturday Cafe, Loaves and Fishes down the road. I mean, we start at the first, like we assume people come to us in need. So, which maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what we understand to be the basis of our relationship, I guess. So I'm processing this out loud with you, friends, just so you know. What's that?
It's that extrovert smart.
Right. Extrovert, yes.
Trust my wife. That's.
So really, yeah, everything that we do needs to, what could be a more helpful way of approaching some of the things that we do? Or if we do come at it from that initial angle and say that really that's the best starting point for our relationship with someone, maybe what are the follow-up questions that push us away from being so paternalistic, 6'10" white man in front of a 5'4" black woman, right? Like this, how can I'm not here to help you, but. It's building trust, you're right. So reverse engineering what you're saying, if I can. If poverty alleviation is rebuilding relationships, we can help that person rebuild a healthy relationship with their identity of self by helping them identify their own gifts, skills, and resources, building a self-confidence. And once they have that self-confidence, then they have the ability to at least come toe-to-toe with someone. We have self-confidence in our resources, if nothing else, to back us up. So it helps them be more, rebuild that relationship with self and have that self-confidence to say, this is what I have and this is what I can contribute to our relationship, so that I can build trust thereafter. Right. Or even just most people will ask why afterward. Why do you do this? Or we'll figure it out as you interact with them. And that tends to fill in the spiritual aspect too. And that spiritual part of the relationship is absolutely important. Right. That said, practically speaking, it's hard, but it calls us to be very careful in how we do things, because if we don't do it carefully, it's going to most easily come off as negative. It doesn't build up the person, and it creates a system of dependency. We don't do that.
So if somebody calls for assistance to the office, how do I do that?
Excellent question. I mean, let's brainstorm that. Right. What can we do? Because the systems we have, the processes we have, may or may not be helpful. We try to be helpful. Great. We need to go have coffee, and I need to figure out what they're good at. You could. Nancy's a busy lady, though. We have to set up an automated attendant for that. Yeah, right. We're working on it. But okay, so the example that we've got is someone calls the church and asks for assistance. How can we approach that, or how could Nancy approach that? Aiding, giving of help in a way that is assets-based. And this is probably above Nancy's pay grade. We'll start with that qualifier. Because we can't let Nancy run away and have coffee with everybody. So. What are some things that we could do, though? I mean, what could we do? So we have those little cards that have phone numbers on them, which is, I mean, in a sense, if we want to get really, really simple, that is giving them the opportunity to have initiative of their own. Here are your options. Please take advantage of all of them or none of them as you feel so moved. But to start.
Where this kind of breaks down, I guess where I don't necessarily understand it, is when people come to you asking for help. Like most of what we talked today was shifting from the relief and rehab stage to development. Are people often only asking for development type? It's usually, I would imagine, more of the relief and rehab. But how much room is there for assets based in a relief and rehab? Maybe more.
Right, you're very right. So the assumption of this chapter is that we're looking at the development. You're very right. So I kind of skipped over that bit. But Phil made a very good point as well. Earlier you mentioned really depends on how they are in that three-step process, where they are. It's going to really depend. If someone is in need of water, you're right, you're not going to be sitting down and saying, so you're good with balloon animals. No, right? So we're going to look for gifts and skills after we address the initial need. You're very right. When it comes to people's needs in our community specifically, I wouldn't feel comfortable enough saying where on that three-step process most people are. I think part of, so maybe to address this very good point is part of that process that Nancy has, they eventually, if not within the first 3 seconds of the phone call being picked up, say, I need X, Y, or Z because of A, B, and C. If someone needs help or food, or sorry, shelter or food, they're probably in a bad way. But we don't know if that means they're on the rehab or the relief, rehab, or development phase of that journey either, nonetheless. So I guess we need to build relationships.
I think one of the things that we need to do is if someone asks for something that we can't give, is not feel guilty. You know, I just went back to my spiritual reference. I thought, oh, you know, it acts when Peter says to the guy at the I have no silver or gold, but I have I give you. You know, Now we may not be able to have them rise up and walk, but being able to say, I can't, go crazy. I mean, but not feel guilty. Be comfortable with being able to say, that one I can't do, that visual thing. That's important. Yeah.
Right. Recognizing that there are limits, and I get crazy.
Did you thought that?
So I think ultimately, I mean, not that this ends the conversation, but this does recognize that it's not as cut and dry as we would like. Needs are needs, but and our limits are also our limits. But how we approach those conversations, noting that we need to be paying attention to people where they are, but also acknowledging and celebrating who they are. And maybe we need to be giving some more time in our ministries to do that work. Maybe intentionally adding that part of it as part of the ministry, part of the work, part of the process. I'm not sure. I'm spitballing here. I'm externally processing. But yeah, if anybody wants to be on the mission committee or do that real good work, I'm sure they'd love some additions. It's almost 7 o'clock, so this next question is, really, if you were going to be looking at ministries and projects, that's really what we need to do, is look at ministry and projects that we have and really assess if they're addressing relief work, great, let it do relief work. But if it's doing any other part of that process and supporting people as they recover and as they do further development, is it building the person up? And is it recognizing the gifts and assets that they have, the gifts and skills and resources that are already there? And if it's not, then it may be time to either fix, change, or cut some of those programs, some of those activities. So that's never a popular idea. Another way to look at it, is to look at poverty alleviation work as either a blueprint model or participatory model. Blueprint model is easy. It takes a lot of work up front. You get the right signatures on it, and then it's done and ready to go. But often those are not the best projects because they don't have that relationship built in. They're not recognizing each individual that's in that process, each individual's gifts and skills. So if you're looking at a ministry and saying, is this something we should be doing? Really, you need to ask, is this a participatory activity? Is this a participatory ministry that's going to do engagement work? It's not easy. Oh, okay. I'll email this to you. I forgot about this part. So there's some good thought. It's an example to use. It's a case study, but it kind of communicates the point of this lesson pretty well. So I will email these to y'all. Just mapping in my brain who we all are. So we can do that later. Okay. Closing reflection and then a prayer. Asset-based participatory development. So acknowledging who they are, what they have, and actively including them in the development of the final process of what they will do. It's a lot of work. There is no real simple way of doing that work. It has no magic formula. It's a process. It is, however, a process that values each community and each community member, recognizing their innate value as beloved children, child of the children of God, and as one who can contribute to the development of their life and the life of their community. Furthermore, this method creates ownership. Ownership inspires enthusiasm. Together, it becomes ours. Ours is a powerful tool for the engine of development. Ownership is really what the ultimate goal is. We can go in and do something, but if someone doesn't want it, it's not going to work. Okay, let's pray together using these words, and then we can talk tonight. So let's pray together. Creator God, we praise you, for we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Each person has gifts and abilities given by you to fulfill your plan in that time and place. Give us eyes to see the gifts of each, so we might lift them up, celebrating your work through them, and in so doing, glorify your name. As we continue to seek your call, there we go, on our lives and on our life as a community, grant us the humility to ask hard questions, perseverance to listen patiently, and confidence that you work in us and in spite of us. Amen. Amen. Interrupted halfway through, but a prayer nonetheless. Thank you all. So this week, if you have a book at home, we focused on chapters 5 and 6, and next week is chapter 10 in very logical order. And Sunday mornings there's always class on Sunday mornings at 9:30. And a couple exciting Sundays coming up. So pay attention to your newsletters and bulletins and things and such. Thank you all for coming and for helping sift through some of this fun stuff. It's good material. So you all appreciate it. Thank you. Bye, Betsy.
I'm just thinking of what this is for the active. So finding out what their talents, what